The massive ship called Harmony of Spheres floated dead in the cold emptiness between stars. Inside the huge vessel, panic spread through the corridors like wildfire. Emergency lights painted everything in angry red, while alarm sounds echoed off the metal walls. Chief Engineer Zixtel pressed his crystalline hands against the main control panel. His body was made of living crystal that normally glowed with soft blue light. But now that light flickered with worry. The readouts in front of him made no sense at all. Power levels jumped up and down like crazy. Energy flows twisted in patterns that should not exist. "This cannot be happening," Zixtal whispered to himself. His people had built these power systems 3,000 years ago. They had never failed, not once. The quantum crystals that powered the ship were perfect. Everyone knew that. Around him, other engineers from different alien species worked at their stations. They moved with the quick, nervous energy of people who knew death was coming. Tentacled beings waved their arms over floating displays. Tall, thin creatures with 6 eyes each stared at holographic charts. Small, furry aliens chattered to each other in high voices full of fear. The ship carried 50,000 people, families, children, old ones who could not fight. They were running from the Void Hunters, the enemy that wanted to kill every living thing in the galaxy. The Harmony of Spheres was supposed to be safe. It was the most advanced ship ever built. Its shields could stop any weapon. Its engines could outrun any pursuer. But now it was just a giant metal coffin drifting through space. "Report," Zixtal called out to his team. A tentacled engineer named Fluxara spoke first. "Main power grid shows impossible readings. The quantum matrix is detecting energy patterns that violate basic physics. Our computers cannot process the data." Another alien, this one tall and covered in blue scales, added more bad news. "Backup systems are failing in sequence. Each one shows the same impossible readings before it dies." Zixtal felt his crystal body grow cold. This made no sense. The power systems were based on quantum crystals grown in perfect harmony. They channeled energy through dimensions that normal matter could not even touch. The technology was so advanced that most species in the galaxy could not understand how it worked. "What about the repair drones?" Zixtal asked. "They cannot identify the problem," Fluxara replied. "The molecular scanners show everything is normal. The quantum field analyzers detect no flaws. Even the probability computers cannot calculate." "What is wrong?" The ship shuddered. Not from any impact, but from systems failing deep in its core. The lights dimmed for a moment before emergency power kicked in. "How long do we have?" Zixtal asked. The question he did not want to hear answered. A small, mouse-like alien checked her instruments. "At current power loss rate, life support will fail in 8 hours, but the Void Hunters will reach us in 6. Silence filled the engineering deck. Everyone knew what that meant. The Void Hunters would not just kill them quickly, they would take the ship apart piece by piece, studying every scream, every moment of terror. They fed on fear and pain like others fed on food. Zixtal looked around at his team. These were the smartest engineers in the galaxy. Between them, they had thousands of years of experience. They had built stars and moved planets. They had created technology that seemed like magic to younger species, and they were helpless. "Sir," said a junior engineer, her voice barely above a whisper, "there is one more option." Everyone turned to look at her. She was young, even by the standards of her long-lived species. Her name was Kiratal, and she worked on the lower decks maintaining old systems that were mostly forgotten. "Speak," Zixtal commanded. "There is a human on board, a mechanic. He works on the old backup systems in the lower levels." The engineering deck fell silent. Then several aliens began to laugh. Not happy laughter, but the bitter sound of people who had given up hope. "A human?" Fluxara's tentacles writhed with amusement. "Those primitive beings who still use metal tools. who believe in something called mechanical intuition instead of proper science. They barely understand quantum physics, added the scaled alien. Their technology is thousands of years behind ours. They still use combustion engines on their homeworld. Zixtal had heard of humans. Everyone in the galaxy had. They were the newest species to join the Galactic Confederation. They came from a small planet called Earth, where they had spent most of their history hitting things with rocks and sticks. Even now, when they had learned to build starships, they still preferred simple solutions to complex problems. Most aliens found humans embarrassing. They were like children playing with adult toys. Sure, they could operate advanced technology, but they did not really understand it. They just pushed buttons and hoped for the best. The human has been on this ship for 2 years, Kiratal continued. He maintains the old mechanical systems that we keep as backups, things like manual door controls and emergency pumps. The Confederation requires someone who can work without computers in case of total system failure. And you think this primitive can solve a problem that our best minds cannot? Zixtal's crystal body flashed with anger. I think, Kiratal said quietly, that we are about to die anyway. What do we have to lose? Another shudder ran through the ship. This time, the lights stayed dim for several seconds before coming back. In the distance, they could hear the sound of something important breaking. Zixtal looked at his instruments again. The readings were getting worse. Power was dropping faster now. Soon the ship's weapons would fail, then the shields, then life support. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the Void Hunters were getting closer. Where is this human? He asked. Deck 47, Section 12, Kiratal replied. He lives near the old maintenance bays. Zixtal made a decision that went against everything he believed about technology and progress. Wake him up. As Kiratal hurried away to fetch the human, Zixtal stared at his failing instruments. He had spent his entire life believing that more advanced was always better, that complex solutions were superior to simple ones, that their perfect technology could handle any problem. But now, with death approaching and all their advanced systems useless, he was about to put his faith in a species that still used wrenches and hammers. The irony was not lost on him. The most advanced ship in the galaxy, powered by technology that bent the laws of physics, might be saved by someone who probably could not even pronounce quantum crystalline matrix. If they lived through this, Zixtal thought, he would never hear the end of it from the other chief engineers in the fleet. But first, they had to live through it. The ship shuddered again, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the Void Hunters smiled their terrible smiles and increased their speed. Marcus Chen woke up to the sound of alarms screaming in his ears. After 2 years on the Harmony of Spheres, he had learned to tell different emergency sounds apart. This was not a drill. This was not a minor system glitch. This was the kind of alarm that meant people were about to die. He rolled out of his narrow bunk and grabbed his work clothes from the floor. His quarters were tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a small desk. The walls were plain metal, not like the fancy curved surfaces in the rest of the ship. Down here in the lower decks, everything was built for function, not beauty. Marcus pulled on his boots and grabbed his toolkit from its spot by the door. The toolkit was old and battered, passed down from his grandfather who had worked on Earth's first space stations. It was full of simple tools that most people in the galaxy thought were museum pieces. Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, a multimeter that was older than some civilizations. The corridors were filled with running aliens. Most of them ignored Marcus completely. He was used to that. To them, he was just the maintenance guy who fixed toilets and unclogged air filters. They barely saw him as a person, just another piece of equipment that came with the ship. Marcus made his way toward the main engineering deck. The ship felt wrong under his feet. There was a vibration that should not be there, a subtle wrongness in the way the deck plates hummed. After 2 years of living inside this ship, he knew its sounds and feelings better than most people knew their own homes. When he reached engineering, the scene was chaos. Aliens of every shape and size clustered around control panels, their voices raised in panic. Holographic displays showed charts and graphs that meant nothing to Marcus, but he could tell from the expressions on alien faces that the news was bad. Chief Engineer Zixtal spotted him first. The crystalline being's body was flickering with stressed light patterns. "You are the human maintenance worker?" "Marcus Chen," he said, hefting his toolkit. "I hear you have a problem." Several aliens turned to stare at him. Marcus had seen those looks before. It was the same expression people might have if someone suggested using a stone axe to perform brain surgery. "This is ridiculous," muttered Fluxera, her tentacles writhing with annoyance. "We are facing a quantum cascade failure in the primary power matrix, and they bring us someone who probably thinks electricity is magic." Marcus ignored the insult. He had heard worse. "What exactly is happening?" Zixtal gestured at the displays around them. "Our power systems are failing in ways that should be impossible. The quantum crystals that power this ship are showing energy patterns that violate the laws of physics. Our most advanced diagnostic systems cannot identify the cause." Marcus looked at the swirling, dancing patterns on the holographic displays. They meant nothing to him. He could not read alien text, and the concepts they were trying to show were beyond his education. But he had learned something important during his time on this ship. Sometimes the most advanced systems failed in the most basic ways. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" he asked. The engineering deck fell silent. Several aliens made. Sounds that Marcus had learned meant extreme offense in their cultures. "Turn it off?" Zixtal's crystal body flashed bright red. "These are quantum power matrices maintaining dimensional field coherence across 17 separate energy planes. They cannot simply be turned off like some primitive combustion engine." "Okay," Marcus said calmly. "Then what about the physical connections? When did someone last check those?" Another long silence. Fluxara spoke first. "Physical connections are monitored by our quantum field sensors. They detect problems at the molecular level. Manual inspection is unnecessary." "Right," Marcus said. "But when did someone actually look at them? With their eyes, I mean." The aliens exchanged glances. Marcus could see confusion in their expressions. The idea of manual inspection seemed foreign to them, like suggesting they count on their fingers instead of using a computer. "Our sensors are far more accurate than biological vision," said the scaled alien. "They can detect flaws smaller than atoms. Why would we use primitive sensory organs when we have perfect instruments?" Marcus set down his toolkit and opened it. The simple tools inside looked like artifacts from a primitive age compared to the gleaming technology around them. Because sometimes the simple approach works when the complicated one doesn't. He pulled out his multimeter, a device so basic that it probably predated faster than light travel. "Mind if I take a look?" Zixtal seemed torn between desperation and disbelief. The ship shuddered again, and somewhere an important-sounding alarm began wailing. "What could you possibly detect that our instruments cannot?" "Maybe nothing," Marcus admitted. "But I've been maintaining the backup systems on this ship for 2 years. I know where all the power conduits run. I know which connections tend to get loose and which circuits run hot. Your quantum computers are looking for quantum problems. Maybe this is just a regular old electrical problem." The aliens stared at him as if he had suggested that the ship was powered by hamsters on wheels. The idea that their perfect technology might fail for mundane reasons seemed to offend them on a personal level. "Electrical problems?" Fluxara's tentacles coiled with disgust. "We are dealing with quantum crystalline matrices that channel energy through folded space-time. This is not some primitive copper wire system." "Even quantum energy has to travel through physical connections," Marcus pointed out. "And physical connections can come loose." Another shudder ran through the ship, stronger this time. The lights dimmed and stayed dim for several seconds. When they came back, they were noticeably dimmer than before. Zixtal made a decision. Show us what you mean. Marcus smiled. It was not a happy smile, but the grim expression of someone who had worked on broken machinery his entire life. First, I need to see the actual power distribution system, not the displays or the readouts, the real hardware. That is in the restricted areas of the ship, said the scaled alien. The power conduits run through sections that require environmental suits to access. Good thing I brought my own, Marcus said, patting a compact suit folded in his toolkit. It was not as advanced as the ones the aliens used, but it would keep him alive in vacuum or hostile atmosphere. As they made their way deeper into the ship, Marcus noticed how the aliens avoided actually touching anything. They waved hands or tentacles over control surfaces that responded to their bioelectric fields. They used force fields to manipulate objects from a distance. They seemed almost afraid of direct physical contact with their own technology. Marcus, on the other hand, had spent his life with his hands covered in grease and metal shavings. He believed in getting dirty when the job required it. He believed in feeling the weight of a tool in his hands, in listening to the sounds machinery made when it was happy or sick. One question, he said as they walked. If your sensors are so good, why do you still have someone like me on board? Zixtal's crystal body flickered with what Marcus had learned was embarrassment. Confederation regulations require at least one crew member capable of manual maintenance in case of total system failure. It is considered a primitive safety measure, but the bureaucrats insist on it. Right, Marcus said. A primitive safety measure. Let's hope it works. The ship shuddered again, and in the distance they could hear the sound of something important failing. Time was running out, and somewhere in the darkness, the Void Hunters were getting closer. Marcus followed the group of alien engineers deeper into the ship than he had ever been before. The corridors here were different from the comfortable living spaces above. Everything was purely functional, built for machines rather than people. Thick power conduits ran along the walls like metal arteries, carrying energy to every part of the massive vessel. The environmental suit he wore was basic compared to the elegant force field bubbles the aliens used, but it did the job. Marcus had always preferred gear he could understand and repair himself. His suit had simple air recyclers, basic temperature control, and a helmet he could see through clearly. No fancy heads-up displays or quantum field generators? The main power distribution hub is just ahead, Zixtal said through the comm system. His crystal body glowed dimly through his force field. This is where all power feeds from the quantum matrix converge before being distributed throughout the ship. They entered a vast chamber filled with machinery that hurt Marcus's eyes to look at. The quantum crystals themselves floated in the center, held in place by forces he could not see or understand. They pulsed with colors that had no names, casting shadows that seemed to bend in impossible directions. Around the crystals, power conduits branched out like the spokes of a wheel. Some were as thick as Marcus's body, others thin as his finger. They carried different types of energy to different ship systems. Life support, weapons, shields, engines, lights, everything depended on this central hub. Our diagnostics show the failure is originating from this chamber, Fluxera explained. Her tentacles gestured at floating displays that showed the same chaotic patterns Marcus had seen in the main engineering deck. But we cannot locate the source of the problem. Marcus looked around the chamber with different eyes than the aliens. While they stared at their instruments and displays, he examined the actual physical hardware. The power conduits looked perfect, on the surface, made from some kind of metal that seemed to absorb light. But Marcus had learned to look beyond the surface. Those displays, he said, pointing at the holographic readouts, they show power fluctuations, right? Quantum cascade irregularities in 17 different dimensional phases, Zixtal confirmed. And when did they start? The aliens looked at each other. The first anomalies appeared approximately 6 months ago, said the scaled alien. Very minor fluctuations that were well within acceptable parameters. They have been gradually increasing in intensity. Marcus nodded. 6 months. That was important. Sudden failures usually meant something broke. Gradual failures usually meant something was wearing out. "Show me the power consumption records for the past year," he said. "Why would you need those?" Fluxara asked. "Power consumption has been completely normal." "Humor me." The aliens projected a new display showing power usage over time. To them, it probably looked like a straight line with minor variations. But Marcus had spent years reading electrical consumption charts. He could see patterns they missed. "There," he said, pointing at tiny variations in the line. "See how the baseline consumption has been creeping up? Very slowly but steadily. That usually means a connection is getting resistive." "Impossible," Zixtal said. "Our materials do not degrade. The connections are made from quantum-stabilized alloys that maintain perfect conductivity indefinitely." "What about mechanical stress?" Marcus asked. "This ship moves around, accelerates, decelerates. Even the smallest vibrations can work connections, loose over time." The aliens looked at him as if he had suggested that gravity might stop working. "Our connections are molecularly bonded," the scaled alien explained patiently. "They cannot work loose." Marcus pulled out his multimeter and approached one of the smaller power conduits. "Mind if I check?" Before anyone could object, he had found an access panel and removed it. Inside was a junction box where several power feeds came together. It looked alien and advanced, but Marcus could recognize the basic concept. Wires went in, wires came out, connections held them together. The aliens crowded around him, their instruments scanning everything he did. Marcus ignored them and started taking readings with his simple multimeter. "What are you measuring?" Kiratal asked. She was the only alien who seemed genuinely curious rather than skeptical. "Voltage drop across the connections," Marcus explained. "If a connection is tight, electricity flows through it easily. If it's loose, there's resistance, and resistance creates heat and voltage drop." He worked his way through the junction box, testing each connection. Most were fine, showing the clean readings he expected. But then he found something interesting. "Here," he said, pointing at a connection point where 3 thick power feeds came together. "This one's showing a voltage drop." "That is impossible," Zixtal insisted. "Our sensors would have detected any resistance in the system." Marcus looked at his multimeter reading, then at the alien instruments surrounding him. "What's the sensitivity threshold on your sensors?" "They can detect resistance changes as small as 1 part in 10 billion, Fluxara said proudly. "And what? Do they consider significant?" "Anything above baseline parameters, usually 1 part in 1 million. Marcus smiled grimly. "That's your problem right there. This connection has been working loose so slowly that your sensors think it's normal. The change is happening below your significance threshold." He showed them his multimeter reading. "See this? 0.003 volts difference across this connection. Your sensors probably dismiss that as measurement noise. But multiply that tiny resistance by the massive current flow through this junction, and you get heat. Heat causes expansion and contraction. That makes the connection even looser. It's a slow feedback loop." The aliens stared at the simple numbers on Marcus's basic instrument. Compared to their elaborate quantum field analyzers, his multimeter looked like a child's toy, but it was showing them something their advanced sensors had missed. "The quantum crystals are sensitive to even tiny power fluctuations," Marcus continued. "As this connection got looser over the past 6 months, it created more and more electrical noise in the power system. The crystals tried to compensate, but eventually the noise became too much for them to handle." He pointed at their diagnostic displays. "All those impossible energy patterns you're seeing, that's not the crystals malfunctioning. That's them desperately trying to filter out electrical noise from a bad connection." Zixtal's crystal body flickered with what Marcus had learned was confusion mixed with revelation. "You are saying that our most advanced power system in the galaxy is failing because of a loose wire?" "Not just any loose wire," Marcus corrected. A really important loose wire carrying about 1,000,000 times more current than anything on Earth. But yeah, basically. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. Several alarms began wailing, and the lights dimmed to emergency levels. How much time do we have? Marcus asked. Kiratal checked her instruments. The Void Hunters will be here in 4 hours. Life support will fail in 5. Marcus looked at the loose connection, then at his toolkit. Good thing I brought the right tool for the job. The aliens watched in fascination and horror as Marcus reached into his toolkit and pulled out the most primitive tool imaginable. A simple adjustable wrench, scarred and worn from decades of use. "You cannot be serious," Fluxara whispered. "You want to use kinetic force adjustment on quantum-stabilized molecular bonds?" Marcus hefted the wrench in his hand, feeling its familiar weight. "Sometimes," he said, "the old ways are the best ways." Marcus held the wrench in his hands and studied the loose connection. The tool felt solid and familiar, worn smooth by his grandfather's hands and then his father's and then his own. 3 generations of mechanics had used this wrench to fix things that more advanced tools could not handle. The aliens around him were practically vibrating with anxiety. Their instruments showed power levels dropping by the minute, and somewhere in the distance, the Void Hunters were closing in with death in their hearts. "Please reconsider," Zixtal pleaded. "The quantum-stabilized molecular bonds that hold these connections together are incredibly delicate. Any kinetic disruption could cause a cascading failure that destroys the entire power matrix." Marcus looked at the crystalline being with patient eyes. How delicate could they be if they've been holding together under the stress of a loose connection? For 6 months? "That is different," Fluxara protested. "The connection worked loose gradually over time. Sudden mechanical force could shatter the molecular structure instantly. Or," Marcus said, "it could tighten the connection and fix the problem." He pointed at his multimeter, which was still showing the voltage drop across the loose junction. "Look, I know this seems crazy to you folks. Your technology is way beyond anything we have on Earth. But electricity is electricity, and connections are connections. The basic principles don't change just because you make them out of fancy materials." The ship shuddered again, and several more alarms joined the chorus of warnings echoing through the chamber. The quantum crystals themselves seemed to pulse. More erratically, their impossible colors flickering like candles in a storm. "We are running out of time," Kiratal observed quietly. "Perhaps we should let him try." Marcus approached the junction box carefully. The power feeds that came together. Here were massive, carrying enough energy to power a small city. If he was wrong about this, the resulting explosion would probably vaporize him instantly, but if he was right, he might save 50,000 lives. He studied the connection closely. It looked alien, but the basic concept was familiar. 3 power. Cables came together at a central hub. The hub had what looked like threaded fittings that clamped down on the cable ends. Over time, vibration and thermal cycling had loosened those fittings just enough to create resistance. "Okay," Marcus said, fitting his wrench to the first connection point. "I'm going to tighten these fittings one at a time. Nice and easy, no sudden movements." "Wait," Zixtal called out. "At least let us clear the chamber first. If the power matrix explodes, there is no reason for all of us to die." Marcus shook his head. "I need you to watch the instruments. If I start making things worse, I need to know immediately." He placed the wrench on the first fitting and applied gentle pressure. The metal resisted for a moment, then gave way with a tiny movement. Maybe a 1/16th of a turn, barely noticeable. Every alien in the chamber held their breath. The quantum crystals continued their erratic pulsing. The diagnostic displays still showed chaos. Marcus moved to the second fitting. This one was tighter, requiring a bit more force. The wrench turned maybe 1/8 of an inch. Still nothing. "Dramatic happened." "The readings are not changing," Fluxara reported, her tentacles wrapped tightly around her instruments. "Give it time," Marcus said. Big systems like this take a while to respond to changes. The third fitting was the tightest of all. Marcus had to lean into the wrench, using his body weight to generate the force needed. The fitting resisted stubbornly, then suddenly gave way with a sharp click that echoed through the chamber. The aliens jumped at the sound, expecting an explosion. Instead, something much more subtle happened. The quantum crystals began to pulse more steadily. The chaotic patterns on the diagnostic displays started to smooth out, like calm returning to stormy water. "I am detecting a decrease in power fluctuations," Zixtal announced, his crystal body beginning to glow more steadily. "The dimensional cascade irregularities are reducing in intensity." Marcus moved back to the first fitting and gave it another tiny adjustment, then the second, then the third. Each time, the improvements became more obvious. The crystals pulsing became more regular. The diagnostic displays showed cleaner patterns. "It is working," Kiratal whispered in amazement. "The quantum matrix is stabilizing." But Marcus was not done yet. He pulled out a small tube from his toolkit and applied a tiny drop of liquid to each connection. "What is that?" Fluxara demanded. "Thread locker," Marcus explained. "It hardens to prevent connections from vibrating loose again. Old mechanics trick." The aliens stared at the simple chemical compound as if it were some kind of miracle substance. In their world of force fields and quantum stabilizers, the idea of using a sticky liquid to hold things together seemed almost primitive, but it worked. As the thread locker set, the connections became solid and stable. The voltage drop across the junction disappeared entirely. The quantum crystals settled into a smooth, steady rhythm that filled the chamber with harmonious light. The diagnostic displays cleared completely, showing normal power flow throughout the ship. Backup systems came online automatically. Support levels returned to normal. Even the ship's engines began humming with their usual steady power. "Main power restored," announced a voice over the comm system. "All systems nominal. We have full engine power and can jump to hyperspace on your command." The aliens in the chamber stood in stunned silence. Their most advanced technology, their perfect quantum crystals, their impossible power matrices, all of it had been saved by a human with a wrench and some sticky liquid. Zixtal was the first to speak. "How did you know? How could you possibly know that such a simple solution would work?" Marcus carefully cleaned his wrench and put it back in his toolkit. "Experience," he said simply. "I've been fixing things my whole life. My dad taught me and his dad taught him. You learn to recognize patterns, to understand how things break and how to fix them." "But this is quantum technology," Fluxara protested. "It operates on principles your species barely understands." "The quantum stuff is beyond me," Marcus admitted. "But the power distribution system is just wires and connections, even if they're made from materials I can't pronounce. And I know wires and connections." He looked around at the stabilized power matrix, the steady glow of the crystals, the clean readings on all the instruments. "Sometimes the most advanced problems have the simplest solutions. Your computers were looking for quantum failures, exotic energy patterns, impossible physics. They were programmed to ignore simple mechanical problems because your engineers assumed such things could not happen." The ship's engines reached full power, and Marcus felt the subtle vibration that meant they were preparing for a hyperspace jump. In a few minutes, they would be light years away from the approaching void hunters. "We should go," Kiratal said. "The bridge will want to jump as soon as possible." As they made their way back through the ship's corridors, Marcus noticed that the aliens were looking at him differently now, not with the dismissive attitude he had grown used to, but with something like respect. "One question," Zixtal said as they walked. "What would you have done if tightening the connections had not worked?" Marcus smiled. "Then I would have tried something else." Maybe checked for corrosion, or looked for broken wires, or tested the power feeds themselves. When you're troubleshooting, you start with the simple stuff and work your way up to the complicated stuff. And if none of that had worked, Marcus shrugged. Then I would have tried percussive maintenance. What is percussive maintenance? Hitting it with a bigger wrench. The aliens stared at him in horror, but Marcus was already thinking about his next job. Somewhere on this ship, there was probably a ventilation fan making a noise it should not make, or a door that stuck when it should. Open smoothly. Simple problems that needed simple solutions. It was good work, and he was good at it. The harmony of spheres jumped to hyperspace, just as the Void Hunter fleet arrived at their previous location. The enemy ships found nothing but empty space and the fading energy signature of a successful escape. In the refugee quarters, 50,000 beings from across the galaxy breathed easier, knowing they would live to see another day. Word spread quickly through the ship about what had happened in the power core. The story grew with each telling, as stories often do. By the time it reached the civilian areas, people were saying that the human had fixed the quantum crystals by hitting them with a hammer. Others claimed he had rebuilt the entire power system using only primitive tools and determination. Marcus found himself something of a celebrity, though he was not comfortable with the attention. Aliens who had never spoken to him before now stopped him in the corridors to thank him. Children of various species pointed at him with tentacles, claws, and pseudopods, whispering to their parents in languages he could not understand. But the most important conversation happened 3 days later, when Chief Engineer Zixtal visited Marcus in his workshop on the lower decks. Marcus was working on an air recycling unit that had been making funny noises. Nothing serious, just a bearing that needed lubrication and adjustment. Simple work that kept his hands busy while his mind processed what had happened. "May I enter?" Zixtal asked from the doorway. Marcus looked up from his work. "Sure. What can I do for you?" The crystalline being stepped into the small workshop and looked around with obvious curiosity. The space was filled with tools that predated faster-than-light travel, spare parts that looked primitive compared to the ship's regular systems, and workbenches scarred by years of honest labor. "I wanted to ask you about something," Zixtal said. "When you approach the power distribution problem, you seem to know exactly what to look for. How?" Marcus set down his wrench and leaned against his workbench. "Experience, mostly, but also because I listen to the ship." "Listen to the ship?" "Every machine has its own voice," Marcus explained. "When it's running right, it sounds healthy. When something's wrong, the sounds change. I've been living on this ship for 2 years. I know how it's supposed to sound and feel." Zixtal's crystal body flickered with interest. "Our sensors monitor thousands of parameters continuously. They detect problems long before biological senses could perceive them." "Sometimes," Marcus agreed, "but sensors can only detect what they're programmed to look for. If a problem falls outside their parameters, they miss it completely." He picked up his multimeter and showed it to Zixtal. "This thing is ancient by your standards. It can't measure quantum fields or dimensional energy or any of that advanced stuff. But it can tell me if electricity is flowing the way it should. And sometimes that's enough." "I have been thinking about what happened," Zixtal said. "We had instruments that could detect molecular-level flaws, but they missed a simple loose connection." "How is that possible?" Marcus smiled. "Because your instruments were too sophisticated. They were looking for exotic failures that matched their complex programming. A loose connection was too simple, too mundane. It fell below their notice threshold." "Like being unable to see the forest for the trees," Zixtal said, using a human expression he had obviously learned recently. "Exactly. You were looking for quantum problems, so you missed the mechanical problem?" Zixtal was quiet for a moment, his crystal body pulsing with soft light. "There is something else I wanted to discuss. The Galactic Confederation has been monitoring our situation. Word of what happened has reached the highest levels of government." Marcus felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Am I in trouble? Quite. The opposite. They want to know if there are more humans like you. Engineers who understand both advanced technology and fundamental mechanical principles. There are plenty of good mechanics on Earth, Marcus said. Better than me, actually. The Confederation is interested in establishing an exchange program. Human engineers would work on Confederation ships and installations, bringing their practical knowledge to our operations. In return, humans would gain access to our advanced technologies and scientific knowledge. Marcus thought about that. It sounded like a good deal for both sides. Humans could learn about quantum physics and faster-than-light travel, while aliens could learn about the value of simple solutions and hands-on troubleshooting. What about the cultural differences? He asked. Most aliens think humans are primitive. Zixtal's body flickered with what Marcus had learned was embarrassment. Recent events have caused us to reconsider that opinion. Perhaps primitive is not the right word. Perhaps we should say practical or intuitive or innovative. Or stubborn, Marcus added with a grin. That too. The point is, we have learned that advancement and wisdom are not always the same thing. Our civilization has become very good at building complex solutions, but we may have forgotten the value of simple ones. Marcus nodded. My grandfather used to say that any fool can make something complicated. It takes a smart person to make it simple. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He was. Fixed everything from old cars to space station life support systems. Never met a machine he couldn't understand. Zixtal left a data pad on Marcus's workbench. If you are interested in the exchange program, the details are there. The Confederation would be honored to have you help train a new generation of engineers. After Zixtal left, Marcus picked up the datapad and scrolled through the information. The program sounded challenging and rewarding. He would work on ships throughout the galaxy, teaching alien engineers to look beyond their instruments and trust their instincts. But first, he had work to finish. The air recycling unit still needed attention, and there were probably a dozen other small problems waiting for him somewhere on the ship. Simple problems that needed simple solutions. Marcus picked up his wrench and got back to work. Outside, his small workshop, the Harmony of Spheres, flew through hyperspace carrying its precious cargo of refugees to safety. The ship's quantum crystals pulsed with steady, healthy light, their power flowing smoothly through connections that were finally tight and secure. Word of the human mechanic and his simple tools spread throughout the galaxy. The story became legend, told and retold in spaceports and engineering schools across 1,000 worlds. They called it the tale of the wrench that saved the galaxy, though Marcus always insisted that it was not the tool that mattered, but the knowledge of when and how to use it. The Galactic Confederation quietly began recruiting human engineers, not for their advanced education or sophisticated equipment, but for their willingness to get their hands dirty and their understanding that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. And in workshops and maintenance bays throughout the galaxy, a new generation of engineers learned to appreciate the wisdom of checking the basics first, of listening to their machines, and of never underestimating the power of a well-used wrench in experienced hands. Marcus never became famous in the way that scientists or politicians become famous. His name did not appear in history books or on monuments, but in the quiet places where machines were maintained and problems were solved, his story lived on. It reminded people that advancement without wisdom is just complexity, and that sometimes the most important person on the ship is not the one with the fanciest degree, but the one who knows how to fix things when they break. The galaxy was a little safer because of that lesson, and 50,000 refugees were alive to prove it.